someone as, you know, who's achieved as much as you, and fortunately I have easy access to you, you know, growing up together and everything, it's awesome to be able to sit down with you and share a little bit of your story.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, we've been friends since before your older brother was born, but I think what I admire more about you is that, you know, all of my paths have sort of come through school and the conventional, you know, sort of stuff we did, whereas everything you did was completely different, and, you know, you've taken a run at that, which is really good.
Thank you, bro. I appreciate that. Speaking of school, did you, when you started school, have, you know, the goal of wanting to play professional rugby?
Yeah, definitely. When I was younger, you know, that's all I did. You know, I used to, it's so cliche, but I definitely used to, you know, score tries in the back garden, and I was like Jean de Villiers or Brian Banner or, you know, Chris Patterson from Scotland, you know, scoring in a big test match. But I think the big problem, and you'll know, you know, playing sports at Trinity, is that I never thought it would happen because we were just so untested on a bigger scale. You know, we used to think about like Paul Boys and, you know, all the big schools and the rugby they were playing, and used to see guys getting contracted straight out of those schools, and you just, you know, I suppose it was always a mental thing. You think, like, I've never played that level, I'm not good enough to play that level, kind of thing.
I definitely think schooling does have an effect on, obviously, your immediate access to getting, you know, a contract to a sporting team or anything. I mean, especially, and I don't know why, but you didn't even make lines in school, which is quite interesting, because I mean, someone like me, I made lines, but I mean, I could never cut it if I ever had to go play professional rugby. So I mean, someone for you, how do you think it is a good indication of like someone's talent, or do you think it's a lot of, you know, opportunities, or maybe just someone that's, you know, you almost missed an opportunity, not through to your fault, but maybe, you know, the selection process?
I think a bit of it. I think if I look back, I put it on me. I think, again, you know, I was very spooked out by going and having to play with all of these big boys schools, and, you know, and always kind of thought I've never played on this level, I'm uncomfortable here. And I think because of that, at a trial, you know, I can remember the way I felt on game days like that, and I definitely played within myself, you know, whereas you at a schoolboy level, you know, maybe mentally you were way better than I was, and you could go and had the confidence, you know, to show what you had, and that's why you made lines. But I suppose a lot of it, what we do is, it just depends on, or a lot of it comes down to the eyes looking at you, and whether or not, you know, they like what you see.
Yeah, because I mean, if they had to watch a game that you were playing at school, they would have, you know, selected you instantly.
So I don't know.
Because I mean, there's literally videos of you on YouTube when you scored that try at St. Stithians at that festival.
Yes, like it, and I did that.
Like, that's an iconic try.
I know, but that dive at the end just kills us, and I'm like, you know, that's just 18-year-old.
Yeah.
Got carried away in the moment.
But do you think it's, as you say, like, it was kind of, you played within yourself? Was it maybe just the nerves, or maybe you kind of limited yourself because, you know, you weren't as positive, you didn't go into the trials thinking, I'm good enough, I can do this?
100%. And I think there's an aspect of, you know, at Trinity, one of the things I loved the most that was maybe a bit detrimental as well was that, you know, we played with the same mates from grade 1 till grade 12. And I suppose, you know, the awesome part about that is that, you know, we've all got really good friendships from those years, and so many memories with the same guys. But it also then gets to a point where when you've got to go to these trials, you don't know how to play in another team, and so you're in a comfort zone playing at school, and going to these trials is completely out of your comfort zone. And I think I just didn't have the mental strength at that stage to then deal with that and know how to bring the best out of myself in that situation.
Do you think it was just maturity that you obviously developed later in life?
Yeah, definitely maturity, and I suppose I had a lot of doubts. You know, can I play with? You know, can I live up to guys of this standard? And it wasn't. You know, uni had a big thing in that, because all of a sudden you go to Marty's, and so many of the guys do come from these big schools. They've all played first team at school, and, you know, then slowly you start chipping away at that stigma. You're like, okay, these guys played, you know, where I thought I couldn't. Now you're playing with them, and slowly, I suppose, like you say, you mature and find ways.
Well, I mean, you've done a lot, obviously, in terms of sacrifice and in terms of, you know, choices that you made in your life to obviously propel you forward and add, you know, momentum towards becoming a professional. I mean, you even studied an extra year at Marty's so that you could continue playing.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's always something we rip into each other about, because it kind of just shows where our priorities were. You know, I was studying kind of just to play rugby.
Were there a lot of people that kind of said that, Carl, you're being silly, just you got your degree, go work?
No, because again, I downplayed it in my head, or because I was downplaying it in my head, I was always afraid to admit that I actually wanted to play professional rugby, because when you have conversations with your mates, guys like Jesse Creel and Andre Pollard were my age, so I was 20 and they were playing for the Springboks, and I was, not even playing Marty's first team, and so I was almost scared to admit to myself, number one, that it was still my goal to play professional sport, and because of that, I didn't admit it to anyone else, and so I kind of downplayed the situation as if, I was just having the best of both worlds, which I was, but ultimately, I wanted a degree, but I really wanted to play professional rugby. I maybe just didn't admit it as much as I should have.
How was the selection process in terms of playing for Marty's and then going to the Griquas? Was it, was it a call up, or how did you hear about the news, or do you like, in terms of rugby, and obviously not many people know like professional terms, do you have a manager, or do you have someone that kind of looks for opportunities in different clubs?
Yeah, so it's amazing what exposure does, because Varsity Cup as a tournament and the coverage it gets on SuperSport, and the level of play, generated all of that. So it was, that whole world was so foreign to me, but it was literally, I had a couple of good games in the Varsity Cup, and then all of a sudden you got like, I'm sure like same as you get guys message you on, it was Facebook Messenger at the time, being like, I'm an agent from an agency, we'd be keen to represent you, and then my link actually came from the fact that the coach at Marty's, who was with me, Harvey Sferi, he had just come from Griquas, and so he knew the now head coach at Griquas, and without telling any of us, he had brought the Griquas coach to watch a week's worth of training and then a game, and from that there were two of us from Marty's that he ended up contracting off the back of that. So that was how it happened for me, yeah. And
then I think it was maybe your last game, you captained the Griquas,
yeah, so my last Curry Cup season, which in that there was only 6 games. So I captained them for six games.
How was that?
It was good. It was a really big challenge. Probably one of my toughest challenges so far, because we were in quite a weird space as a team, and I was really happy to be in that position, and I threw myself at captaining, and what someone told me afterwards was that you could see my level of play had dropped, and that was maybe because I then diverted my focus to being captain, and so it was a difficult thing to process because we didn't have the season we wanted to have. I wasn't playing as well as I wanted to play, but at the same time felt like I was giving absolutely everything, so I didn't know where else to go to, so it was a big learning curve, and certainly a lot of maturity came out of that. And I think one of the big things I realized was that, I was trying to do everything on my own. I felt like I'd been given the chance to sort of take control, and I wasn't trying to control everything, but I wanted to put 100% effort into absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And you can't do that. It was the review process with mates that were close enough whose opinions I respected, and they told me, you've got to have people help you along the way.
Yeah. Well, you were deputy head boy at school,
Yeah.
So you've obviously had roles of responsibility, almost obviously deserving, but also just put on you. Do you? Because obviously lots of players, like I preferred to play rugby not having those roles of responsibility.
Yeah.
Are you someone that enjoys those roles of responsibilities? Yeah. As you say, obviously it was difficult to almost focus on everything instead of, you're trying to do everything and then certain things you let slip. So obviously, how do you, as a potential captain, you're playing now for the Glasgow Warriors, is that something you'd want to make your way up into?
Yeah, I'd love to captain Glasgow. I'm so far off it, or far away from it at the moment, but I would definitely say I like being involved in those kind of roles, and as you get to the professional game, there's way more than just the captain. Then we've got like attack leaders, defensive leaders, overall leaders. So there's the opportunity to be involved in those kind of groups and in those positions is massive, and I definitely love being involved. Yeah.
So you, after playing for Griquas, you went and played sevens for Scotland,
Yeah. So actually, my final year for Griquas, I went on a 3-week trial to the sevens. It was in like Griquas' pre-season, and played 2 of the sevens legs in Vancouver and Las Vegas, and then came back and played the season for Griquas, and then signed a full contract with the sevens. Yeah.
And did you see your style of playing change at all from sevens to 15s, or vice versa?
Not really, or not really the actual play. I think one thing again, you go to the sevens, you think, sure, but like, am I going to be fit enough? And I think I got a lot of confidence in the fact that I was fit enough to be on the sevens field. And the coaches at the time, kept saying that, my engine was a strength of mine, which maybe I hadn't looked at before. So I think it definitely made me try to show them 15s coaches that, I had a good engine and I could I would put a heavy or a high work rate onto the field. But again, I just think mentally was where I learnt the most. So 14 minutes is so quick on a rugby field that if you, again, trying to do too much and trying too hard, you almost put yourself in a panic state where then you overdo it and you make silly mistakes. So I think the big lessons I learned at sevens were just, again, lessons of maturity, how to stay calm in the moment and how to know where to focus your energy almost.
And the style of training, was that different at all? Obviously, did they focus more on fitness and ball skills in sevens, or how did it work?
Well, because of the sevens game, because it is 2 7-minute halves, your heart rate is just in the red, for much longer periods of time, and so the training almost mimics that. So whereas 15s is sort of a bit more structured and drill focused, the sevens were sort of a much more combination of skills, but conditioning in between, and then being able to still execute those skills under pressure when you're that tired.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the sevens games does, because there's so much space and so few of you on the field. It puts every aspect of your play into the highlights. You can't hide. If you've got a weakness, sevens is gonna bring it out.
Would that have helped you, obviously, now going into 15s, knowing when I was in sevens, I didn't have any opportunity to show weakness? Has that kind of, so grown in 15s now? And so now there's more opportunity, but you still got that mindset of there's no opportunity for weakness.
Yeah, I think it definitely has. I didn't actually have the easiest time at the sevens. I didn't get as much game time as I want. Some games I was sitting on the bench the whole game, and in a lot of those games when we were playing countries like South Africa, big countries, which kind of showed that they were nervous to put me on, which I obviously didn't like at all. And so I just used that to try and learn. And when I went to the 15s, I actually just felt I was way more comfortable in a 15s setup, in a 15s system. And so what happened is, because I'd gone from feeling very uncomfortable to almost feeling back at home, if that makes sense, it was just a little confidence boost when I went back to 15s. That was really good.
Yeah. And in terms of like the level of difficulty and the intensity of training, or of the gameplay, training, everything, would you say that, like, what's the biggest jump? Is it from varsity to club, or is it from like club to international?
It's difficult for me to say entirely, because I've only had the one international cap, and so from a game perspective it's probably harder, but from a training perspective, definitely club to international. It's almost like a sieve. When you go to uni, there's still maybe a lot of guys who have a lot more weaknesses, and some of those get filtered out when you go to club. But by the time you get to international, every player is really well-rounded, knows what they're doing, knows the systems really well, and the competition is just so much more. So it's like a sieve, but like a bottleneck as well. And so it's that step up, knowing that you have to be on top of your game all the time. I'm sure, the same for you and all your athletes. You can't let your diet or training slip, because, those changes might show really quickly if you're not that disciplined. And I suppose it's that intensity all the time at international level that was probably the most difficult to adjust to.
Yeah. And in terms of gameplay, because I know when I played Lions, I found it far less tiring to play those games, because everyone had a role and they fulfilled that role.
Yeah.
Whereas at school, there were roles that people weren't fulfilling and you had to compensate for them.
Yeah.
So obviously your opponents now are as equally as good as you. So you kind of, does it correlate? How does the work ethic or the work rate on the field correlate?
Yeah, I think it goes up, because, like you say, everybody knows their role. So then to start breaking these guys down, they've looked at your game just as much as we've looked at theirs. And so to break these guys down, it takes a lot of time and a lot of energy, and you got to be willing to work for that.
Yeah.
Same for you guys, and a lot of the guys that buy programs from you, they've got to be willing to put in the time and the discipline.
Yeah. For you, in terms of your diet, do they, obviously maybe you need to be a certain weight, are they very strict in terms of your diet and your eating?
Not certainly not as strict as you guys need to be. We've got a lot more leeway, and I suppose it's a way bigger framework that they give us. So they measure our skin folds, they measure our body weight. We do strength testing, and based on that, everybody has their individual parameters. And so as long as you are maintaining or within those parameters or bettering them, then they're fine. Then they don't actually stress too much.
So someone for you that's never really had a problem with ever being, like obviously if you had to put on lots of weight, they can be like, oh, you need to lose some weight so you can keep the speed up and you can. Yeah. So, but someone for you that's never really struggled with that, do they kind of just like, okay, Carl, you've always been fine, just do what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, to a degree, I suppose, because we eat breakfast and lunch at the club, and those meals are controlled by the nutritionist. So because he is controlling 2 out of 3 meals a day for us, but there is a lot of that. And the nutritionist is kind of on hand if you want him, but it's definitely more a deal of, if you need extra help from me, you need to come to me.
Yeah. And now you've got an injury. Do you want to explain that?
Yeah, so I was fresh out of lockdown. Probably 6 weeks back, we'd sort of gradually built up the training, and I was at a training session trying to sprint. We were trying to get some high speed meters in, and I was trying to sprint, and as I was like sort of at top speed, my hamstring just snapped. So I've had 2 surgeries now to reattach the tendon.
Sure. And recovery time?
So the first time was 4 months, and then because I've then done it again, it's now 5 months. So looking at the end of March now.
How long after the first one was the second one?
12 weeks, which was a bit frustrating. So I was 12 of 16 weeks done, and then it went again, so then went back to 0 of 20.
Sure. So you're going back on...
the 8th next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday. And obviously now you have to go back into quarantine.
Yeah.
How has that affected? Obviously, you could, personally, when I was like, okay, these athletes aren't going to be able to train, I was thinking like, yeah, they probably are training. They're probably there at the club, whatever, regardless of, because obviously you need to be a top level athlete, you're going to be training. So I thought maybe, depending on obviously the government regulations, but I would say they're still there, they're still training, they're still doing it, or was it complete lockdown?
It was complete lockdown. I think what was the big difference from South Africa to Scotland was that we were allowed out for an hour a day, because I think there's many more people over there that live in flats and stuff, don't have gardens like a lot of people here do. And that hour a day, I think for a lot of us was crucial. But yeah, it's so difficult to know sort of, because if you look at the rugby world coming back, there's been so many injuries. And I think a lot of that is lockdown. And then obviously because all our money comes from TV rights, they then put us under so much. We only had 8 weeks to then be match fit again, but for the first 4 of those 8 weeks, we weren't allowed to train in groups of more than 2. So I think there's a lot of it in that, doing not as much as you should have for so long to then ramping it up so quickly.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, in Scotland, people might be in flats and not have gardens. How is the lifestyle in Scotland in terms of living space and living arrangements?
It's very different. People always ask me, what do you miss most about home? And obviously the people is number one, but from the lifestyle, space is definitely the biggest thing for me. Everybody is used to, we used to, as a silly example, we used to, you'll rent a flat and probably one whole wall of your bedroom is cupboards with lots of space, whereas most flats don't have cupboards. You either have to put in cupboards or it's just chest of drawers, and which is such a silly first world example. But even restaurants here have so much space, whereas a lot of them over there are all like sidewalk cafes kind of thing. So it is very different, but it is, there's pros and cons to everything.
Yeah. And now you going back, you're gonna have to literally just stay in your flat for 2 weeks.
Yeah. Which is a little bit niggly. I'm not looking forward to that. At least I've got an excuse when I come out and I don't have a tan from being home for 2 weeks. I'll just tell everyone I lost it in quarantine.
Yeah. And everyone wants to know like the life of a professional sportsman. Like let's say it's prime season, lockdown or whatever, take that out of the picture. What is the average day looking like for you?
So it varies as the week goes on. So if we play a game Saturday, then we'll have Sunday off. Monday, you'll come in a little bit later, so we'll probably be in for like 9 o'clock. And then you'll have Monday will be our big gym day, so it'll be either just lower body or full body, but you'll definitely be doing your main lower body lift, which for most of us is squatting. So we'll probably gym. It's not a terribly long session. We're probably only in the gym for an hour. And then we've got all sorts of analysis meetings. So we'll split as backs and forwards, have those meetings. So look at it purely from a backs view and purely from a forwards. And then we'll have lunch and then go back to the analysis rooms and we'll do a full team review of Saturday's game. And then most Mondays they'll announce the team, which is quite nice. You don't have to wait long. And then we'll go out and do what we call a clarity session. So it'll be like a jog at best, and only half an hour. And all we'll do is look at things we want to tweak for the week coming up based on the review, and just walk through any of those sorts of changes so that from early in the week, you start getting yourself ready. And then we'll go to Tuesday as our big contact day. So you'll have an upper body gym session in the morning, save the legs, and then we'll go out, we'll split training, so forwards and backs for about 45 minutes, and then we get like a 15-minute refuel, and then we go into our big team contact training session, which will be pretty much bone on bone most of the session, a lot of high-speed running, and probably like an hour and a half. But then again, we're done by probably 1:30, 2. Wednesday off. Thursday, another high-speed training session, but with way less contact, and a full body, I want to say like a primer type gym session, a lot of power, CMJ jumps, 10 meters sprints through the gates, that kind of thing, so that you almost, you give yourself confidence, feel like the body's feeling good and explosive, and then Friday captains and Saturday play.
Do they often, like a training where you do sprints and stuff, do they regulate your speed and be like, oh, Carl, last week you ran this and this time, why aren't you doing that?
Yeah.
Other than the fitness test, for speed and explosive power and everything.
Yeah. So they'll we fill out like a Google Doc every gym session, and you'll log what weights you've pushed and that kind of thing. But you also do a daily monitoring. So you'll do like a hamstring stretch, calf stretch, groin squeeze, and that sort of thing. And those will kind of show you how fatigued your muscles are. So they'll look at all of those as a whole. So if they can see that you're not looking fatigued, you're looking good, and you're still not sprinting as quick as you were, then they might be like, what's going on? But they'll also use it to adapt your training load if they feel like you're starting to overtrain and your body's taking fatigue. Yeah.
How was it for you as a South African? Obviously, your mom being Scottish, but how was it going there? Was there a good reception from the other Scottish players?
Yeah.
In terms of a South African coming and playing with them?
Yeah, there was actually a brilliant reception. It was probably the thing I was most nervous of, especially because I was going over there to try and make the national team, and so you wonder what they're going to think about the South African coming over here and wanting to play for our country. Like, who does he think he is, kind of thing. But they. I always tell people the Glaswegians are very similar to people we find in Joburg, very down to earth, very welcoming, which made it pretty easy.
Yeah, and the club itself, apart from obviously the international side's different, but the club itself, I assume there's several players that aren't actually from Scotland itself.
Yeah, so we've got 3 South Africans, 2 other guys from the Stormers. We've got a few boys from from Fiji. And then, a couple of Aussies, Kiwis, scattered all over.
Do you think, you call it the brain drain in South Africa, like where all the smart accountants, doctors, whatever, leave for different opportunities overseas? Do you think South Africans' rugby is maybe strengthened because there's more opportunities for people with equal talent to make it? Or do you think it's maybe weakened because, people like yourself who are skilled, who maybe didn't get the opportunity to play locally, internationally, but could have, are now playing overseas?
I think it's such a difficult question to answer, because you can obviously the big thing with Super Rugby over the last couple of years has been that there's been a decline in viewers, and you wonder if any of that has to do with the fact that so many of the Springboks are playing overseas, and so we don't have all our top players playing here in the country. If you look at it from that perspective, maybe the local level rugby is decreased slightly. Or the spectacle as a whole, maybe, but I think the quality is still really high, and really competitive. And I think what someone like Rusty has done is they've turned that into a strength, that they've got lots of players playing in the conditions overseas and understanding how teams over there play the game, and they then bringing those guys like Faf de Klerk in, who then know and understand that game and can give insight.
That was actually what I was going to ask next. Is, do you think you kind of answered it, but do you think because they are like, let's think about the Bulls, you know, with Francois Hochot back, like let's say 10 years ago, when like half the Bulls team was the Springboks. Do you think them playing together strengthened the Springbok team, or do you think the teams now, you know, all those individual players in their different clubs playing, getting the experience, then coming back, do you think it's been more beneficial now, or do you think it's more beneficial then?
I think there's pros and cons to both, and I think the important thing is that you try find the balance. You know, where I think for a long time, a lot of people were focusing on only the negatives of the fact that these guys weren't playing together and weren't playing for clubs. You know, it was only when coaches started looking at the pros of, okay, but they do have all this insider knowledge now. And I think it's important to get a balance with that. You don't want all your Springboks playing overseas and none of them playing here together, because that's also not good. I think is the best way to answer that question. But I think from rugby as a whole, it's not struggling. You know, the level of the Springboks isn't struggling. I think where we might need to look is making sure that our club teams and the leagues they're playing in are still massively competitive. Yeah,
you've obviously seen the varsity level in Scotland. How does that compare to South African?
It's not. Unfortunately, it's not nearly as good. You know, and I think they're trying to improve it. But I think a tournament like Varsity Cup has just taken our varsity level, you know, to a completely different level. You know, I'd probably say that the university and stuff level over there is probably the same as our club level over here. Because even when you're at Marty's, you play Varsity Cup and then you play the rest of the club season, and even the difference between that is huge.
Yeah. Do you have, obviously being in Scotland now, but do you have a lot of interest in, you know, varsity rugby still?
I probably don't, but purely because I struggle to watch it as well now. You know, when I was at Griquas, I had a massive interest in it because I could still sit Monday night and watch it everywhere, and then, you know, you pick up on who of those guys have gotten professional contracts, and so that keeps you engaged. Whereas I suppose going to Scotland and not being able to watch every week and follow it as closely, then I've lost sort of that personal connection. You know, I always say, you know, sport's so much better to watch when you know someone that's on the field.
Yeah.
But I do still follow it, and I certainly check Marty's results every week to see how they're doing.
Yeah. That's also something that I think sports at varsity creates, is that camaraderie. Whereas, like, I went to Tux, I didn't play any sports at varsity. Like, I couldn't care less what happens or who wins. Or like, that's also something that rugby in general creates, is that, you know, the brotherhood. And that's the biggest thing that I miss from rugby, is being able to, you know, go on the field with 14 other people and, you know, they got their back. They got your back.
Yeah, no, for sure. That is definitely the best thing. And I think varsity gets that right because it's not so professional yet. You know, whereas at the profession, and so that brings in the social side of it maybe a little bit more. You know, it's not like guys are going out and getting absolutely smashed every week, but it's definitely a bit more relaxed. You know, that you realise these guys aren't doing this as a full-time job. You know, just also let them enjoy themselves.
What's the biggest learning curve that you experienced, maybe even from school to varsity, or even from Griquas to going over to Scotland? What's the number one lesson you kind of had to learn? Or something that you definitely know you've learned along the way?
I think sort of the mental side of the game, and how little I knew about that. You know, everything I've said about sort of not, you know, doubting myself, and I put nothing into, well, I suppose actually we kind of did with Sean Raff, but other than that, you know, I put nothing into learning about the mental side and how to cope with, you know, that increase in intensity, but then also being able to switch off.
Yeah.
Is probably definitely the number one. You know, you can't be on the go the whole time. You know, you're just going to burn out. You've got to know when to switch off, and you've got to know how to have the confidence and put yourself in a position where you can perform in those uncomfortable situations.
Yeah. Well, Carl, bro, thank you so much for sitting down with me. Thank you so much for taking the time, flying all the way from Scotland here just to do the podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for
I appreciate it, bro. And I really hope that injury is sorted and you're on the field as soon as possible.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jason.
And it's awesome to have a South African on the Scotland field.
Yeah, exactly. And you got a show this weekend, so
yeah,
good luck with
I do.
that.
Thank you very much, bro. I appreciate that. Sweet guys, thanks for listening.